Thanks for joining us on. I think this is number four, number three. Becky, you can tell me which number of Causal Islands we're on.
Your invite says 4.
Yeah, 4. Right, good. Okay, that's what I thought. I thought it was 4. Yeah, thank you for joining us, Steve. I guess a little bit of updates for the show generally. I'm Zishan Makani. I work at Fission. I am hosting today our episode with Steve Krouse of Val Town, also formerly the runner of the Future of Programming podcast. I think that might come up a little later today. We'll have other people kind of come in and have questions and join in. Maybe Boris will make the move over to the speaker section and have some questions. So I think that's it. Any other updates for the podcast? We're going to have more and more episodes going, a lot more stuff that we want to cover in terms of content. And like today, a lot more interesting guests like we have with Steve today. So without further ado, Steve Krouse, do you want to give us a little intro about yourself, your background, and tell us a little bit about Val Town?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So my background, let's see how I describe myself. I've started a bunch of different entrepreneurial kind of things and worked in tech generally, usually mostly with a focus on developer tools. I worked at Looker, it's a data analytics company. I started a after-school program teaching kids to code and built curriculum and developer tools for kids, which really informs kind of how I see the developer tool space a lot. And then after that, I started this podcast, an online community called The Future of Coding, which has a really big respect for like the history, like where computing has come from, like the early pioneers of it, and then tries to look to the future of what we could do with computers. And so I ran that podcast for a while now. It's in great hands with Ivan Reese. And recently, my project is Val Town. It's a social website to write and run code. You can create cron jobs, HTTP endpoints, all from the browser, instantly deployed. And there's also a lot of social features for sharing code, sharing JSON values, likes, comments. So it's like a little bit of a mix of the vibes of maybe Twitter and AWS Lambda and GitHub and NPM kind of all in one, hopefully very simple and fun to use product.
Cool. Future of coding, as you said, programming came to my head. But yeah, future of coding, of course. And yeah, I mean, so on some stuff in Val Town, the thing I kind of want to start with is like, you mentioned already a few things there, something like Twitter, something like Lambda, something like GitHub and Gist. Can you talk a little bit about the motivations, like when and obviously, you know, it's a newer company. I mean, you've been working on it for a while and growing. Can you talk a little bit about how, like, what are those elements that really motivated you to move in this direction and to then start a company around this idea?
Yeah, great question. So I guess I've been inspired by so many different products in the space for years. I feel like I've been like the perfect customer of a product like this, and I was never that happy with my options because I feel like I mostly identify with being a front-endy kind of a person, and then it's like occasionally you have to do some back-end stuff. It's like, now I have to like set up some server. So like back in the day, I guess that was Heroku, which you know, I was a fan of Heroku back in the day. And I found this website. I actually kind of forgot it existed. It was called webscript.io. It doesn't exist anymore, but it's kind of like a proto Val Town in a lot of ways. It's on Lua, which makes a lot of sense. Maybe later in this conversation, we could take in the direction of like how well does your programming language serialize stuff? Like how much is like serialization like a primitive of the like was your language designed for like distributed computation, like a Smalltalk, like a Lua, or like was that not at all part of it? And then you have to like totally design your design around the limitations. Like, you know, like so much of the worst parts about Val Town are that we like JSONify stuff all the time. Like, you know, like you can't, like serialization is one of the worst and hardest parts about having chosen JavaScript. But anyways, we can get back to that.
Yeah, there are trade-offs obviously on that one choice right there, right?
Totally, totally. Yeah, just that one choice. So anyways, like where like I've for some reason I felt like kind of going chronologically and just giving you all of the inspirations I've had that like kind of brought me
I think
here.
it's important because it's important like where you got stuck, right? Like where you got stuck and you felt like you needed what became Val Town, right? Is really key to this.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Cloud9, which was like one of the first kind of successful cloud IDEs. I was a big fan of Replit. They were a big sponsor of the Future of Coding podcast, and it's a great product in education. Code Sandbox, CodePen. Like I'm just a big fan of cloud IDEs, particularly like, you know, I was a teacher, and so I had all these Chromebooks that kids, you know, I personally bought like hundreds of Chromebooks, and I was, you know, teaching kids on Chromebooks. So browser IDEs were very important to me. But then if you were a child and you wanted to do like a little bit of server-side state, it was hard. It was really hard to set that up without a credit card. That's like definitely a disenfranchising thing for children. And let's see. I feel like I'm forgetting a bunch. I guess another couple of big inspirations for me in more recent times were Dark, the Darklang programming language. I worked with those guys a lot. They have their own, you know, language and a structured editor. I'm also a big fan of the Unison programming language, which they're like one of their big ideas is you kind of throw code in a database, and you refer to code by its ID, not by its like textual name. And so Val Town has a lot of ideas.
Like content address.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they hash the contents of the code and you refer to it that way. So a lot of the ideas of Dark and Unison and a lot of these other platforms ended up in Val Town. Like I you know, kind of took the ideas that I like the most without like some of the baggage that like makes those ideas like harder to implement or whatever. So we can get into some of that. It's like, you know,
well, do you feel, I mean,
like go for it.
I was say, because like, you know, when we talk about this like front endy versus back endy, which is always weird terms to me, but this kind of separation, which I think is like something to that choice of JavaScript as you mentioned. But how much of this is about, you know, and what Heroku was really about? Me going back through all these things you kind of mentioned, why even cloud IDE, why all this was like this idea of how do we maybe mask or remove the difficulties of infrastructure for people who just want to make something happen? To your point, even on education, right? Like not only the pricing of cloud services, like to get started with Amazon, a credit card has to be attached. But even with other stuff, it's like, or credits or, you know, whatever the case might be, if you got something for free, is the concept generally that infrastructure is takes too much away from actually trying to make something happen for a lot of people? Is that like a you know, a kind of thread through all of this?
Yeah. I guess that's kind of like the founding idea behind like the quote serverless movement, which is you know, obviously a hilarious name because it's all about servers, but it's like about not having to think about servers. So yeah, I guess we all just, or like, I feel like there's a user profile that totally describes me, of a person who just like really doesn't want to think about server crashing and having to like restart a server, or like having to scale up a server, or God forbid Kubernetes, or like even just like understand IAM roles in AWS, or like open an AWS account. And, you know, like, yeah, I guess it's hard to like know exactly where the line is, but there's something in that morass of infrastructure hell start being like, this accidental complexity, and can't we come up with better abstractions so I can just write the business logic? You know, this is like a very old dream. but yeah,
a continuing dream.
that's
Every
innovation.
company is selling. Every company is selling some foundation of, you know, write your business, right? Whether it's
Yeah,
back end
yeah, yeah.
centric or user centric, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and really, the amount of developer tools companies, like developers love like working on developer tools. Everyone likes working on products that are meaningful to them and solve problems they've had. And developers have developer problems. That's why there's so many developer tool companies. Uh, and a lot of them are kind of promising like Firebase for X, kind of like
Right.
Firebase for real-time Snake, Firebase for LLMs, Firebase for crypto or whatever, or Heroku for X. It's like an old dream, and the true
Right.
success stories in the space aren't that common. We can get into that. Like there's this like crossing the chasm problem where it's
Right.
like easy to get folks to sign up for a developer tool for like it's a very different kind of business orientation to get people to sign up to use something at a hackathon versus an enterprise contract where the money is to be made. So there's a tension there, and like, can you cross that chasm as a business is like like an interesting threshold that like Twilio did and SendGrid did, but Heroku did not. Like Heroku kind of got off the ride early, and now like Supabase is
Right.
trying to. I don't know if you saw our article about Supabase, but Supabase is a company that I have a lot of respect for. That we famously kind of moved off of Supabase and wrote a blog post about it. But like I guess and I'm rooting for them. Like Supabase is now trying to cross that chasm of it's a developer tool that's so easy and wonderful to sign up for at a hackathon, and will it scale with you as your company grows from one person to 5 or 10 or 100? So, anyways, I kind of got off track there.
No, that's good. I mean, I mean, obviously, how I've seen at least Val Town grow. Yeah, I was going back through some history, early hacker news threads, I guess, Lobster, etc. And I think I remember in the Ink and Switch one, you did a video with Ink and Switch. But one thing that was kind of mentioned was like, Valtown seemed to also grow from this, like you mentioned, like Twitter API. I want to like use some other functionality that someone has already written. I want to integrate that, and I want to do something based on that. And I think there was like a mention of points like you can easily do, with Valtown things like IFTT, right? Kind of, code snippets. But I guess to this question on crossing the chasm and thinking about enterprise and a company in this bit, like, how do you move from something that people can use for kind of ease of functionality? And I want to talk a lot about interfaces as we go forward here, but to go from like ease of functionality, anybody can kind of like get something up and running, to something where an enterprise might go, or someone below enterprise but somewhere in the middle might go, yeah, this is the thing that will make my X engineering group much faster. Or I mean, do you care about those kind of things, or how does that kind of work within the view of where Valtown is going, I guess?
Yeah, totally. Great question. I think having the way I see it right now, and what got me move from a space of search and prototyping to like I want to start a company in the space was having developer tool company role models for me to look up to that like I was able to see cross that chasm and like didn't lose their soul. Because I had no interest in building a company or a product that's like only useful for enterprises. It's like not at all. That just doesn't sound interesting. And I also didn't want to flame out like maybe like I don't know, not to throw shade at Eve at all, but Eve is a company is a great example of a company that built some unbelievable prototypes and research, but wasn't able to find the funding or like a market
Granger,
for what
this
they
is
were
like
doing.
Chris Granger's work, right? Chris
Yeah,
Granger's work.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like not to just pick them out. You could point to a lot of developer tool companies that weren't able to cross the chasm. So I didn't like either of those outcomes. But I feel like in recent years, we have a wonderful collection of companies that have. GitHub is one of the best examples of it. Vercel is another company I look up to a lot. What's another one? Retool is one that I also have a ton of respect for.
Okay. Yeah. These are ones that we bring up.
Oh,
Fission a ton, right? Of course,
yeah.
for Cell in
Yeah.
particular. Yeah, is another one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so like the
Um,
way like the overall strategy here is like bottoms up product led growth, which is what's it's like the same tech, the strategy behind Dropbox and Slack, um, just applied to developer tools. And like the basic playbook is you build an unbelievably delightful product that hobbyists use at on the nights and weekend at hackathons, and then they just love it and they talk about it all the time. And some of these people kind of sneak it into work, and that's already starting to happen with Val Town around the edges. And you kind of build on that momentum. You invest in the features that make it more and more possible for people to bring your product into the office, and you try and like follow the demand, hold on. Like to be honest, like I don't exactly know how to do it. I have like a vague sense from watching these other companies, but
right.
that's the dream that you like you build something that starts with the hobbyists in the nights and weekends, and you somehow are able to do both, where you keep it being delightful for the hobbyist, the students, casual user, but you keep adding more serious features to get the people who pay, and GitHub
Yeah,
has crushed it, Vercel has crushed it, so that's what I
yeah,
aspire to do.
yeah. It's having worked at back in the database wars of the 2013s and 14s when I worked at Basho. I mean, there was similar kind of caveat. It was obviously more about storage and databases, but what features do you add? What do people use? How do they use it for other projects versus enterprise, versus bigger projects? I mean, I think so. It's interesting. So I think, we talked earlier about how a lot of Val Town is really about, again, the serverless toward the serverless mode, towards that hiding the Lambda, hiding the infrastructure. Um, even. But a lot of what you all are doing is also into the interface, right? This idea of shareability, reusability, a DSL. I don't know if you want me to use that term, some sort of term for how you can do imports in a way and have. I know you've been going through and use stuff in V3, but still things that you can use to make things easier or more explicit, or implicit that I have some questions about implicit versus explicit in the model to come. But how is the interface for Val Town another integral part that is maybe you could say different from the other tools in the cloud that try to make infrastructure easier?
Yeah, good question. So I guess maybe just to start and paint a visual picture for the podcast audience, Valtown, the website is val.town, val.town. And when you go to the website, you can sign up, and you are basically presented with a text box on the web. If you're familiar with CodeMirror, it's a popular browser-based editor that a lot of folks like Replit and Observable use. So basically, it's a text box on a web page where you can write JavaScript or TypeScript, and in version 3, we're going to have JSX as well. So it's very familiar with if you've used CodePen or Replit or any of those other forms. Where Valtown starts to get a little bit more unique is that it's heavily inspired by Twitter, and so it really encourages you to write a lot of short snippets of code, and you compose up into complex applications through lots of small snippets that are all connected. And the reason we go in this direction is we're big believers in composability, reusability, and what you get for free in that kind of a world, and we can get into like the import export kind of story, is if I have this big project. Well, so I guess the idea here was it always felt to me that like a project and then a package system, like a library, like GitHub has projects, and then npm, which is also owned by GitHub, is where packages live. To me, that always felt like artificial distinctions, like what really like is a project, and projects have like all sorts of things in between projects have composability within a project, but there's no composability across projects. If you want composability across project, like, publish a thing to NPM. Why do we have to like publish something to NPM to now get composability back into the project we originally had? And so Val Town kind of borrows this idea from Unison. Unison has this global namespace. Well, global namespaces are kind of Unison didn't invent them, but I think Unison kind of really brought that idea forward, particularly in the realm of programming, a global namespace of code and data. And so that's how Val Town works. It's a global namespace of code and data scoped to each user, which is kind of a Twittery idea. So in version 1 and 2 of Val Town, if I have a variable called foo and it equals 1 or whatever, or it could be a function, you can just write, you or I, anyone can just write, if it's public, at stevekrouse.foo, and just as easily as you tag someone on Twitter, you can import my functions and data into your code. No publish to npm step in between. So that's the way in which Val Town is just kind of like implicitly a package manager. And that like it all kind of comes out like in version 2. There were like a lot of version 1 and 2 of Val Town. There were a lot of opinionated decisions we made, and like this like DSL kind of things we added, like custom runtime features we added to JavaScript. So like if you were to ask, like you did, like what's the difference between Val Town and like another cloud platform? The answer was, it used to be longer. With version 3, we removed a lot of those things. So, I won't get into that. And so in version 3, really one of the only distinctive characteristics of Val Town, well, it's funny to say it like that. One of the things that, because Val Town is like distinctive in its collection of features that we've like borrowed from a lot of other folks, but like one of the things that's very uniquely Val Town is a focus on small snippets of code being defined as top-level primitives and then composing those up. There's no like notion of like the fact that there's no notion of a file system and you have like a bunch of files and you have your code in files. That's like a pretty uniquely Val Town kind of thing.
Right. In terms of like how the Val Town platform itself works, though, I mean, the one thing I was kind of wondering in this is, the namespacing, that makes, I think that's a great thing, right? The idea, and then like anytime I fork, or I guess like in the gist model, like I can fork someone else's code, make it my own. That now I have that under essentially my namespace, right? An interesting question I have in this is because obviously in the back end you're doing a lot of this stuff to run this on those very infrastructure defined platforms, I imagine. Where do things go wrong? Like in terms of what you have, like what are kind of interesting situations where not only gone wrong, but where you've had to start having to handle a lot more complexity for the platform versus the way people get to interact with it.
Is the question about complexity we've had to deal with at Val Town?
Yeah, well, because you mentioned with V3, you're kind of trying to move away from these runtime features, right? To be making things more explicit on the I guess the developers or users of Val Town. But one thing I kind of wonder is, in a model where, I mean, you talked about this idea of combining. I mean, you're thinking about Unison. We talked about Unison. That is also a language with an entire kind of runtime. Obviously, you guys have a runtime that happens, in the kind of background of all this. What is the complexity that has to handle to allow for people to do things easier in the interface?
Yeah. Great question. So, basically, in version 1 and version 2, we had a lot of. I just like added an @ symbol to JavaScript, which is totally invalid syntax, and I added all sorts of like random semantics. I added .email to console, so like console.email will email the author of the function. I added persistent mutation semantics to it. So you could do @me.foo ++ or @me.foo equals and then some object, and I would at the end of execution, I would JSONify whatever it is you assigned it to, and persist that in our database.
Right.
So, which is like now it seems to me like what a crazy idea that I thought that was ever going to work or scale on a couple of levels. Like, well, just on the level of in memory as code is running, it's a complicated object, and then I like have to do all sorts of crazy work, turn that into JSON, and then if you restart that computation and expect it to be like this rich object that it was just a second ago, you're going to be upset because it's not. Now it's JSON.
Right.
So like that mismatch that we talked about earlier in this conversation of like some languages just aren't designed to like persist rich data structures, and JavaScript is one of them.
Right.
And you just got to kind of serialize and unserialize all the time and design around that as a platform and as a programming language.
Hello, managed to come in. Sorry for being late. I have been listening in the background. I think this is, I read your article, and I think calling it a social website, I think your instincts are correct from an interaction perspective, that the @ sign has become a social business primitive, is the wording that I use. That's not totally correct. And it started with Twitter. Slack kept it going. And now we've kind of got it everywhere, that there's a certain understanding from users that @ something is going to do stuff, right? Like we have a mental model that's in there. Everything you're saying is 100% correct. You're like, oh my God, I can't just like add this stuff to JavaScript. But I think as an interface, it's 100% correct. And how do we merge those things together without having to do the lift of changing a programming language?
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is where we've landed, that the correct place for these sorts of innovations is at the interface level, which more concretely in this context is the editor. So in Val Town version 3, you use your same muscle memory. You type the @ symbol in the editor.
Yes.
You type the name of the val you want to import, and the autocomplete does exactly what you want. It autocompletes to the name. It throws a normal web standard JavaScript import up at the top of the file. Everything works the way you'd want it to work, and there's no @ symbol left in the code after you've accepted the completion.
Yeah. I think that's. I think this calling it a social website is really the jumping off point for so many things. I think that a number of us are uncomfortable with the platform control over a lot of different things. So we're seeing that with social networking and Twitter and Blue Sky and so on. And people are starting to look at GitHub and be like, oh, wait, does Microsoft just own everything? That's a complicated choke point. And yet yet there's huge value in managing a social website, whether it's functions or people or other primitives. How do you think about the interaction of, or the evolution of, both coding and a social website on that layer?
On the layer of who gets who gets to be in charge of it, kind of a thing. Like,
I guess that's one angle, right? Like, so, I think back to you saying like where Heroku like missed the turn, and one of my alternate histories that I think about is, what if Heroku had open sourced itself so that enterprise could run their own? How do you think about Val Town as a destination versus various elements of Val Town spreading elsewhere?
Yeah. Okay. I guess I feel like the easiest place to start is about like lock-in and how much better of a story we have now that we're not running custom JavaScript. We don't have a custom JavaScript runtime. Vals should just work everywhere. So you should be able to just copy and paste your vals. That's the first place to start. Secondly, we have an API that like makes it really easy to get out all of your vals and all the public vals of the entire platform in a very short amount of time. So really kind of protecting our data at all. But, you know, potential like it's a sort of thing where I would never like it to be the case that we have a restricted API, but it's like it seems like literally every social network starts with a super open API and then locks down on it over time. So,
But you mentioned like Darklang earlier, right? I mean, that's another take on a platform with somewhat restrictedness around it, right? Like buying into the platform versus being able to take things away from it, right?
Yeah, that was one of Darklang's biggest hurdles for people. They were just like, wait, you're telling me it's a custom language, custom runtime. I can't even copy and paste this code elsewhere. Like I'm totally locked in. Yeah, that was like a super hard pill for folks to swallow. So yeah, I'm not even. I'm going the exact opposite direction. Like we to be honest, we actually want your vals. We want them to run everywhere. Like that's to us the vision. The way Val Town succeeds is if vals become ubiquitous in the sense of they just are the default way to talk about computation in the abstract and especially server-side computation. So whenever there's a blog that talks about some computer science concept, or you're explaining a JavaScript library, or you're showing off your API docs and you're showing people how to make queries to your API, or anything of that sort, we want like an embedded val or a link to a val, kind of in the way that people will link to like a Postman collection, or people used to link to like a glitch thing, or RunKit is like still on npm to show people how to do stuff. Yeah, we want Val Town to be like this default place. So and this default kind of embed, like Twitter is, like we're trying to make this new web primitive. And so for us, being really, really standards based and have nothing custom, being able to run everywhere, just being everybody's friend, being Switzerland as much as possible, it's so important to us. And like the vibes of openness are really key to like winning hearts and minds of folks. And so we think a lot about like just open sourcing more of what we're up to. We like barely even have a runtime. There's like not that much to open source there. But in theory, I think we'd be open to it. And then the front end, in theory, we'd be open to open sourcing that too. And then like in the direction that Fission goes in of execution being somehow federated, like I'm open-minded to all of that stuff. I mean,
obviously that's the part that we're seeing that's super interesting, where we're at this very low layer of starting with deterministic functions, but lots of the fun stuff comes at that higher level where you're playing, and so the same like very shared vision to what you're saying is we want a lower level down substrate that runs everywhere and has amazing interfaces and communities like Val Town. I think some of the interesting pieces there really just end up being right, like where on the computation versus education slide are you? How really that's my question for direction of Val Town.
Yeah, we really want to be the UI. Metaphorically, we want to be the GitHub to like a Git, and like for us, the Git in this case is JavaScript, TypeScript, JSX, and we want to just like
really great framing.
It would be great if we all the time are looking very hard at using an existing functions as a service platform. Like Vercel has a great situation where they use AWS to run a lot of their stuff. They use Cloudflare to run a lot of their stuff, and like the Next.js app compiles down to Lambdas. Val Town does not compile down to Lambdas. Unfortunately, we like run that ourselves, which has some benefits, but ultimately we would like to just build the web app. We just want to focus on this educational interfacey thing. and then have someone else deal with running a function as a service platform, because that's, just not what the innovation we're trying to add to the space.
That's a lot of work on its own accord, right? To your point,
Yeah.
like where do you innovate at, right? And to innovate at that point,
Innovation budgets.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
But just to give you, because I think it's kind of interesting, the reason why we're not using one of these other platforms, even though we'd like to, and we might if they added, we just need like a couple extra features. A lot of the platforms don't have really great support for like all of NPM packages, and just like that's like one of the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
one of the main ones is deploy time. At Val Town, we want your deploy time and the runtime to be unbelievably fast, because Val Town is both. We're a cloud IDE where you're like running expressions like it's a REPL, and so we need that to be well under a second to feel fun and fast. And then also in a deployed setting, we need things to be probably even faster. And so literally all of our competitors are only focused, well, virtually mostly focused on that second case of being fast in a deployed setting. And like the deploy time, they're very proud to boast about like 6-second deploys, and we're like, no, I guess that's fine for deploys, but that's not fine for a REPL.
It's nowhere close for a REPL. Yeah. So that's interesting. Are you comfortable? Like, I don't have a good picture in my mind of well, and it's not the vibe of like Val Town versus X.
We're getting there.
What do you see as the competitives?
Oh yeah. Oh wow.
Sorry, I don't mean X as in Twitter.
I'm a big fan of like analogies, and so like to me it's like less about competition and more about like how I compare myself to folks, just to like explain stuff. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about Cloudflare and how like I only a couple of months ago realized to what extent every single feature we've ever built and have thought about building, Cloudflare already has. It kind of blew my mind. And there were a lot of features that Cloudflare has that, well, like, the reason I didn't realize this comparison was so strong was I didn't really know about all of Cloudflare's features. And there are a lot of Cloudflare features like durable objects that are like kind of wacky and like weirdly designed. And I only now that I've like tried to build similar things and failed and seen all the issues with it, only now I'm like, now I see why they made those weird decisions. Like I could have made that left turn. That like that's really thoughtful. So I'm a big fan of Cloudflare, and I think Workers products are in a lot of ways what Val Town is trying to do is take their Workers products and just make them 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more consumerized and easy to use, fun. Kind of thing. Like in the way that you could call like Cloudflare Workers like WordPress, and Val Town more like Twitter.
Right.
It's like really the same. Like So I think a lot about.
And to step back to the previous thing you were getting at, Steve, we have a question from the audience I want to ask as well. But the thing I wanted to get at was you were talking about this idea of having like a REPL like experience. It's essentially this idea that a lot of other platforms, it's like you give it some code packaged up to ship, it has to then compile that or generate some sort of apparatus like a Lambda for it to run. How do you all try to attempt to have this, like, I guess to your point, like an interpretive feel? You almost want to treat like vals as like interpreted code that just get run as they come in, as they get registered, right? How do you go about kind of trying to make that happen as in that vein versus the compile and ship and deploy, which is that 6 seconds you talked about?
Well, so the Val 10 version 3 is coming out on Monday. So we just rebuilt our whole evaluation stack, and it's a lot faster and cleaner now, which is fantastic. I guess there are a couple things going on. One of the things is that Val Town, all of Val Town runs in one region near one database. So there's no of like deploying to the edge or deploying I guess, when you deploy to AWS, you deploy to one region, but when you deploy to Cloudflare, it's really kind of, or Vercel, I guess, like there's like edge compute stuff happening, and they're like really kind of propagating stuff around the whole freaking world, and they're busting caches and CDNs around the whole freaking world, and that can take a couple seconds. So, like the fact that we are in one region gives us some advantage in that. Like on the other hand, I have users who are like, nah, like I have some users who are so excited for Val Town version 3 because this means that they can copy and paste their Val Town code into Dino deploy and get their Vals running at the edge. And that's great. I'm into that. And we love to use Dino deploy as our runtime engine. But anyways, they because they're deploying to the edge, it takes a couple seconds. It's still pretty fast considering what it's doing. But Val Town, when you run a Val, we have a really great cache. So we use Dino to run our code. And so Dino has a really wonderful caching system that mostly just does what you want. So if you're running new code, but it has dependencies that have been run recently, they're just like already on the computer. So we don't have to re-download those. Dino has really great permissioning and security guarantees around able to run things on the same computer, just in different processes. So you really can share a file system and not worry that it's users are gonna escape the Dino sandbox. So anyways, I guess the short answer is Dino does a lot of this for us. It was like designed well by people who wanted to build a function as a service platform on top of it.
Yeah, they've done a great job. And so there's no future you think in a Val Town world of you mentioned this Apple analogy, so I'm just going off that. And I think you mentioned a lot about. I mean, there's a lot of history. Like the thing you mentioned about like putting it more in the editor or the interface versus putting those semantics of the @ symbol inside of the codes. It goes back to a lot of work in like contextual editing, right? I know you did future coding, so there's a lot of that, right? And so I wonder, is there a world where Val Towns are like, I want to start seeing what like partial evaluation where you're looking at like I'm in the middle of creating a Val, but it's already running what it can run versus I hit the run button.
Yeah, these are the sort of futuristic ideas that I loved back in my future of coding days. These days, I'm more focused on like boring table stakes things.
Yeah, that's true.
It's so sad when idealists become pragmatists. But
that's the quote of the episode.
It's so sad.
I think there's something to be said for honing the edges of something. Right? Like you start customizing a tool to the task at hand. And I think that necessarily means like, guess what? It's no longer a Swiss Army knife, but it's got a really nice, smooth handle.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I guess like here where like I think a good case study that I'll go through quickly is in the early version of Val Town. I was a big believer in futuristic omniscient debugging, where I store the inputs of outputs of every function all the way up and down the call stack, and non-determinate and all non-determinism, random numbers and HTTP requests. So everything is fully replayable and debuggable, and you should really never have to use console.log. And it's awesome and very futuristic and cool, and just super complex and expensive to maintain and cause so many issues down the line. We ripped out all of that in version 3, and we just have
memoization is gone, right? That's a big piece, right? State is all explicit now, right? Versus what you talked about earlier.
Yeah. So if you mutate a variable, we don't like persist those mutations implicitly behind the scenes. If you want to mutate some state, you have to like explicitly set a value to a variable. It's an asynchronous operation, like setting a value in a key value store, and we have helpers for that. But like a lot of the futuristic, implicit, magical stuff that I dreamed about in the future of coding days, it was causing way more issues than it was solving. So this really so one part reason is when you do a lot of new things, you end up in places that nobody else is, and you have to like just solve more problems that nobody else has solved before, and you just like and it's a like factorial combination that's that you just don't want to go down. But in some ways, even more importantly, your user, you have to start with where people are and bring them along with you for the ride. And users are used to console.log debugging, and they're not used to future omniscient debugging. And so they just weren't even using these wonderful features I was building for them, and they wanted console.log to work better. And I was like, no, like, anyways. So I've learned to love the old way of doing things, for better and for worse, and just
it's
like
old.
embrace.
It's meeting users where they are.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to be true to your what if, right? Like, so if I extract your what if that you stated several times is, what if vals ran everywhere? What if every chunk of code could be interactive because it uses the val primitives? And to get that everywhere, you have to actually go down to the lowest level of the pyramid to be like, okay, everywhere means like you don't need a PhD in computer science to start hacking at it. Which is maybe a good question of where do you think your pyramid is?
Hey, people write Haskell without a PhD. Okay.
Well, my pain. I think it's complicated today. Like we talk about like stacks, and we talk about a DevOps expert or a front end developer or other stuff like that, and especially in this serverless space where more of the stack and using a platform like Workers and Cloudflare where it kind of like disappears even more. Steve, how do you say this is the type of developer? And I'll actually start by there of saying the same. It's a developer audience. How do you label like who you see using Val Town and what do you want more of to grow that definition?
Yeah. So the users we have today are definitely programmers. One thing that surprised me is how many people use Val Town who previously hadn't used JavaScript or TypeScript all that much. Like some people really had to learn JavaScript to use Val Town.
Wow.
Yeah, that really surprised me. But I guess like my vision for Val Town is that it feel a lot like a spreadsheet in the sense that you start with kind of concrete things that work. You start with other people's code. You start with data. And then in little cells, you add incrementally more formula-y things over time. And at any given point in time, like errors are isolated only to the cells that there are errors in. Everything else continues to work. It's not like a project that either all compiles or doesn't compile. And the benefits of a system like that is that I think it's very incrementally learnable. You don't have to learn all of JavaScript. You just have to learn how to tweak someone else's code a little bit, or just combining two people's functions. So I think it does make JavaScript quite learnable for programmers. I've been very, well, not disappointed. I know we have a lot of work to do to make Val Town the place where people learn to code. But that is the aspiration, and we haven't seen that yet. People know how to code. They just maybe don't know JavaScript yet. So yeah, right now are like.
So I wanted to get this question. Yeah. Go for it. Finish it. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that like right now our like super target customer is a guy in his 30s that owns an Arduino. Like if you own an Arduino, I can almost guarantee that you will see Val Town and be like, yep, that's what I want to do to continue to automate my life.
Okay, so what you're saying, Steve, is that Val Town and Fission should go in on a bulk order of Arduinos.
Yes, or we should.
It's actually home automation. Mailing list. Home automation. Yeah. Home do-it-yourself at-home automation customers, right? That's that make up this. Yeah, I want to get to this question to be had in the audience. So Alexandre, I think, mentions how Val Town essentially compares to WebAssembly, and really, I think the question really gets at interoperability. And what does it mean to have interoperability? Is interoperability just within the Val Town system, or is there kind of a dream for a much larger interoperable kind of world? And then that kind of hits on like openness as well. But that's the question that Alexandre has.
Yeah. Yeah. So on one level, WebAssembly works in Val Town because WebAssembly works in JavaScript and Dino. So there are like a number of WASM libraries that we use already. You can use SQLite in Val Town. Like you can run SQLite in Val Town using WASM today, and so there is some of that we just kind of get for free because of how great WASM is, and that kind of runs everywhere. In terms of composability and like a world in which Val 10 functions aren't JavaScript, but they're WASM-y things, and you can run like a true any language. You have your Python vals running next to your TypeScript vals, and it's like a WASM bridge thing. I love that vision. I don't think it's a very near-term vision because I just don't think it matters in the sense that, like back to my analogy about vals being a lingua franca akin to what we see in spreadsheets. Like you don't really complain about the spreadsheet formula language. It's just like the language they give you, and it's where your data is. It's the tool everyone uses. You just like learn how to use the freaking formula language of the tool you're in because everyone uses it. And not to force everyone to use JavaScript, but I kind of just want to force everyone to use JavaScript. It's like good enough. Using it for everything else anyways. If you want to do some automation, it'll just be easier to do it in Val 10 JavaScript than Python in some other tool, just because of everything around JavaScript that we can bring to bear. And part of where this is coming from for me is that I saw Replit, which was originally an ASM.js project, as some of you may know your history.
Early days.
Yeah, and so much about what's great about Replit is that it really is this jack of all trades, and that you can run like 40 different programming languages in it. But we wanted to very much go the other direction because I never felt happy using Replit to build anything complex because it's just not good enough at any one language. Like it's just passable at languages, and so we wanted to just go so deep in JavaScript and TypeScript and things we're doing to make JavaScript and TypeScript work so well in Val Town. You just can't do it for more than one language. So we're big believers in
again
that ecosystem.
It is interesting that you have that "and" in the middle. JavaScript and TypeScript.
And now JSX. So there are two ands.
How do you feel about TypeScript in the mix there?
Yeah. It's funny. Like you could like list all of my bets. Like we bet big on Dino. We bet on CodeMirror. We bet on a browser-based editor. But anyways, I don't feel. TypeScript really does feel like it's here to stay. It feels like really great technology. It's weird that Microsoft owns it. It's weird that like the code base is so kind of opaque and hard to work with. But it's hard to imagine doing Val Town without it. There's just so much of the benefits of composability and the guardrails that TypeScript gives you are just like even just knowing when you have a promise. So like all the time, even me, I will like make some HTTP request and then try to compute with the value that I get back. And TypeScript will just be like we know that property foo does not exist on that object bar because there are only 3 properties that exist on it: then, catch, and it's just like, we know it's a promise. So we it's not what you think it is. And without that error, I would have that extra debugging step that I don't have to deal with because TypeScript is great. So anyways, like from a web standards perspective, TypeScript is a weird one. Like I'm a big believer in web standards, and TypeScript is not a web standard.
Right.
But we're into it. We're into it anyways. Yeah, JSX was a weird one. We like didn't know how to add JSX in because like, what does it compile to? Does it compile to React? We found a way to get it in with like I think it's a TypeScript pragma statement. But anyways, it's a great question, and JSX and TypeScript do make me uncomfortable, but they feel like pseudo web standards that are reasonable enough to bet on for now. Like in 3 years, 5 years, like might I regret these bets? Maybe, but if I didn't make these bets, like for the next 3 to 5 years, I just hear every single day people being like, "Where's my TypeScript? Where's my JSX?" That's what we've been hearing. Where's my JSX? Where's my JSX? And finally, now we have JSX.
I think that actually answers my question about the like pyramid, right? So you broadened the pyramid to React developers in JSX, and you broadened the pyramid, and we can argue in which direction, with TypeScript, where people are like, no, I am wedded to doing JavaScript with types. So you got to do this, and I think that is a adding JSX to that. I think is the more controversial one, but it's also dead obvious. Again, your prior comment about like WordPress or Twitter or whatever is I think fits in there as well. Is no one's going to plug their ears and go like, well, I use other framework that has 1% the reach of React. You got to support it if it's actively being used in our industry.
Yeah, it's a lot of these are tough calls because like you could, it's a slippery slope to be like, well, if people ask for JSX and you give them JSX, like people ask for Python every week, like why don't you give them Python? Like at some point you have to draw a line, and you'll never make everyone happy. So it's anyways, that's the struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So other than 3.0's coming out, what do you want people to check out? What do you want people to get excited about? What do you want to see more of on Val Town? And how can we help spread that word?
Oh, thank you. So 3.0 is coming out Monday, 1 p.m. So maybe check it out Tuesday once we've ironed out all the bugs and issues. Vals will be 50% faster. There'll be web standard JavaScript. It's really kind of a good time. Well, I guess to be honest, you might want to wait like a month for us to like redo all of our docs and tutorials and stuff because it's a team of 3. So we have some work to do. But yeah, Vals are a lot faster now, and you can really use them to make high endpoints websites, like full stack websites, really browser. One of my biggest priorities for the rest of this year after V3 launches will be working on the embedded Vals as a product. We really want folks to be using Vals to explain just programming or JavaScript concepts, and particularly API docs. I think that's where embedded Vals will really shine. Like, here's how you call my API. Just don't copy and paste this code. Just like see what output this code came up with the last time it was run, and then fork and run it on your Val Town account with one button click. So that's a big focus of ours going forward. So if you have an API,
that's still running. That's still running in Val Town, but now they're embeddable within another interface or the case may be, right? Your not maybe Markdown docs, but your document structure to some degree.
Just an iframe
embeddable. Yep.
It's just an iframe. It's like we want Vals to be web primitives like tweets. Like it really is my dream for a Val to be on the news in the way that like a tweet will be like put up on CNN and like talked about. That's what we want. But we're a long way to go.
Yeah, you could have shared Sam Bankman-Fried, the code snippet that showcased what they were doing. Yeah, exactly. That's
the hard-coded constants.
So if there are any fraudsters out there, please break the law using Val Town so that when we catch you, the newspaper article can link to the actual Val.
Yeah. Boom.
Amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Boris, anything else you want to
No,
throw
I
out
think that's
there on the
fantastic.
general?
I mean, I think generally lovely to hear where you're headed and how you're thinking about this stuff. I think very aligned with how we're thinking about things, and ultimately we have to prototype and have examples of how to consume Homestar IPVM functions in full stack web apps. So like, let's look at doing that in Val. I'm excited to dig in and use it directly. I think it's a really good time. We kind of say with Causal Islands, we say future of computing. So we're like kind of one layer down. And I totally get where you're like, no, like let's get coding to be a first class primitive. And that's amazing. And, I hope we all get some time to actually evolve this stuff a little bit more.
Totally. Yeah. You guys are starting more from the bottom. We're coming from the top. Maybe we'll meet in the middle somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. And we'll hit the stop recording button and you can listen to the podcast wherever fine podcasts are found. Thank you again, Steve.